All right, today we're going to crack open the playbook of one of the world's most enduring and, let's face it, controversial leaders. We're going to dive into how Vladimir Putin, the former spy, has used the old tactics of the KGB to control a global superpower for nearly a quarter of a century. I mean, just think about that for a second. 25 years. In that time, the UK has burned through 7 prime ministers, the US has had 4 different presidents, India has seen 3 PMs, but Russia, one guy has been in charge the whole time. If you're 25 years old in Russia right now, you have literally never known another leader. And what's so wild is what this has led to. Despite all the accusations from the West about him being an authoritarian, his support at home is sky high, especially with young people. Get this, a staggering 84% of Russians between 18 and 24 have a positive view of him. So that really sets up the big question, right? How does a leader who basically tears up the rulebook, who dismantles democratic institutions, not only hang on to power, but command such genuine, widespread loyalty? Well, the answer isn't simple, and it all starts in a period of absolute chaos. To really get the solution he offered the Russian people, you first have to understand the massive problem he promised to solve. And to do that, we've got to jump in a time machine and go back to the 1990s. Look, the 90s in Russia weren't just tough. They were an absolute disaster, a total national humiliation. The economy was in a nosedive, hyperinflation made people's life savings worthless practically overnight, and a handful of new oligarchs were buying up the country's most valuable assets. We're talking oil and gas companies for pennies on the dollar. Society itself felt like it was crumbling, and the president, Boris Yeltsin, was seen as weak and corrupt. You had a whole country just desperate for stability, for anyone with a strong hand to fix things. And you know who was watching all of this go down? A then unknown KGB agent. For Vladimir Putin, seeing the Soviet Union collapse wasn't just some political event on the news. He saw it as a deep, personal disgrace, a national tragedy. And that belief, it would become the engine driving his entire political career. So, the big question is, how did this nobody, this bureaucrat who was supposed to be a puppet for the elites, suddenly become a national hero? Like, almost overnight. Well, his rise to power was anything but normal. Imagine this. It's late summer 1999, right after Putin's been appointed prime minister. And out of nowhere, terror strikes. Over just 2 weeks, apartment buildings across Russia are blown up in the middle of the night while people are sleeping. This wasn't just a series of attacks. It was a deep psychological trauma that sent a wave of pure fear across the entire nation. And right in the middle of all that fear and panic, Putin makes his move. It was a masterstroke, really. He goes on TV, he's decisive, he's blunt, and he blames Chechen terrorists. He uses this raw, tough guy language that just cuts through all the noise and connects with a terrified population. He didn't just promise justice, he promised to hunt them down and destroy them. And just like that, the unknown bureaucrat became the nation's protector. Okay, so he's got the power, but how has he kept it for 25 years? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The answer is in the skills, the spycraft he learned during his 15 years in the KGB. He doesn't run the country like a politician. He runs it like an intelligence officer. It all comes down to 4 specific tactics, and they're straight out of the KGB handbook. They aren't about politics. They're about psychological manipulation and control. These are the 4 pillars of his power: active measures, setting an example, using compromat files, and creating a controlled reality. Let's break them down one by one. So, first up, active measures. Now, that's just a fancy KGB term for psychological warfare. And in the political world, Putin aimed this weapon at one main target: the flow of information. The mission was simple: take apart any independent source of news or criticism, piece by piece, until the only voice left was the state's. And man, was he efficient about it. He didn't just, shut down TV stations. No. He got clever. He used things like business disputes or made up charges like tax fraud to squeeze the owners until they had no choice but to sell their channels to state-run companies. When the journalists from one independent station fled to another one, he just took that one over too. In less than a decade, the entire media landscape was under his control. All right, tactic number 2 is all about keeping the powerful people in line. The oligarchs, the officials, anyone who could possibly challenge him. The strategy is simple, but it is brutally effective. It basically boils down to the motto, punish 1 to teach 100. And it is brutally effective. The most famous early example was when he had Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was Russia's richest man at the time, arrested back in 2003. But the pattern just keeps going. I mean, in just the last few years, a shocking number of high-profile execs, a lot of them from big energy companies, have died in really bizarre, really suspicious ways. The message to everyone else in the elite is crystal clear. Stay loyal, or you could be next. Tactic number 3 is pure old-school spy stuff. It's called kompromat, which basically means compromising material. It's rooted in this core KGB idea that everybody has a secret. So you collect that dirt, financial dirt, personal secrets, affairs, and you keep it in a file ready to use as blackmail to control them. And this is how you keep anyone from even thinking about challenging you. They know the security service has a file on them, just waiting to be leaked. A secret video can destroy a political career overnight. A recorded phone call can ruin a reputation forever. It's an incredibly powerful way to neutralize your opponents without ever firing a shot. And this brings us to the final tactic, the one that ties everything else together. When you control the media, when you intimidate the elite, and when you hold secrets over everyone's head, you can do something amazing. You can create a controlled reality. It's a world where facts just aren't as important as the emotional story the government is telling. And here's how you see it play out in the real world. What most of the world calls an invasion of Ukraine on Russian state TV is framed as a special military operation to liberate Ukraine from Nazis. The annexation of Crimea isn't an annexation. It's Crimea returning home. Every single event gets pushed through this simple filter. Russia is the hero and the West is the villain. In this reality, the truth is whatever the state says it is. But here's the thing. These spy tactics, they're not just for controlling things at home. According to the source, they're all in service of a much bigger ambition, a geopolitical goal that goes right back to how Putin sees the fall of the Soviet Union as a tragedy that needs to be reversed. When you piece it all together, a clear strategy starts to emerge. First, you use NATO's expansion as the justification for everything you do. Then, you use soft power. You create economic alliances to pull former Soviet countries back into your orbit. You back that up with hard power, military alliances that give you an excuse to send in troops. And if that doesn't work, use direct force, like we saw in Georgia and Ukraine. And you wrap the whole thing in this powerful idea of the Russian world, this belief that Russia has a right, even a duty, to control any place where Russian is spoken. Okay, so the source we're looking at wraps this all up with a really provocative comparison, arguing that we've kind of seen this movie before. These patterns, rising from chaos, using national grievance, having this expansionist ideology, they're not exactly new. Now, look, this is a really heavy parallel to draw, for sure, but the source asks us to just look at the patterns. Both leaders came to power from the wreckage of a collapsed empire and a sense of national humiliation. Both used that feeling of grievance to build a powerful story. Both pointed to a clear external enemy to unite their people. Both justified taking over neighboring lands by saying they were protecting their own people. And both systematically crushed any real opposition at home. The argument here is that the psychological playbook is eerily similar. But here's the key takeaway, the big so what from the source material. The argument is that Putin isn't just repeating history, he's upgrading it. He's learned from the mistakes of the past. Instead of launching a massive global war, he prefers a more modern, hybrid warfare, things like cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, economic pressure. He seems to understand that in the 21st century, real power can be projected more effectively by controlling information than by brute force alone. And that leaves us with a pretty vital question about what power even looks like today.